Welcome to Empowering Your Thoughts, an outreach ministry of Christ International Church. On this program, we deal with mental health issues and how they intersect with our faith. Please comment, like, subscribe, and share this program with a friend. And your hosts for today's show and mental health advocates, Tabitha Perez, Valerie Taylor, and Nicole McKenzie.
Hi, I'm Valerie.
Hello, I'm Nicole.
Hello, everyone. I am Tabitha, and welcome back to Empowering Your Thoughts. Today, we are going to be dealing with a heavy topic, the topic of grief. We're going to talk about a few different things. First, we're going to take us through who is a psychotherapist, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, through her 5 stages of grief. Then we're going to talk about something called ambiguous loss, and I'll explain that a little later on. And then we're going to touch a little bit on what I coined kind of as a leprosy syndrome, but it's you'll understand a little bit later, and we'll draw it out back to what we're all going through right now. The past few weeks have been really challenging for all of us. We've gone through kind of this cycle of what's going on in the world. And whereas probably 3-4 weeks ago, none of us knew anyone personally who had died from COVID-19. And then about a couple weeks ago, the circle started getting a little smaller, where we knew a person of a person, where the degrees of separation were maybe 2 or 3. And now we're in this and probably last week, where it's come a little closer to home. And that degree of separation has gone down to 2 or 1, or even ourselves have been contracted COVID-19, or know someone personally who has contracted COVID-19. Of course, we want to follow all the guidelines from the World Health Organization, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. And we want to, of course, wash our hands, stay home if your state tells you to do that, wear a covering over your face when you're out, and make sure you do all the safety precautions and wipe all high touch surfaces. We want to do all that stuff. All that is external, though. All of that deals with the external things that we can do to protect ourselves from COVID-19. None of those things tell us how can we protect our internal feelings, thoughts, all of our everything that we're going through from this disease, from this illness, from this virus that's going around. Hopefully we can give you a few tips today on how to deal with this problem that we have going on internally. I want to cover today the grief that is really close to the grief of losing someone. I want to deal with the grief that's a little more distant, that we may not realize that we are dealing with, that the grief with the loss that is not quite tangible. And then we're going to help you to get to the other side of it, hopefully. So let's talk about now the 5 stages of grief. Once again, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the doctor who came up with this, along with Dr. David Kessler, who's also a psychotherapist. The first step is denial. Denial. Now, before I actually go into this, I want to help you to understand that it's kind of a grief cycle. It's not you pass this, then you go on to the next level, then you don't graduate stages of grief. It's a cycle. You cycle through the stages of grief, which means sometimes you'll go back to step 2 when you've already hit step 5. You'll be back at step 1 one day, and you'll be at step 4 the next day. It's not about graduating. And so I like to think of them as a cycle, yes, but also as stairs. Stairs, they're not just one-way stairs. Stairs can go up, and you can go down a stair. You can be on step 3, you can skip some steps. So just give yourself, we're going to, first of all, put a little breath in there and allow ourselves to realize you're not tied to this only being a one-way cycle. So denial. Denial is the first stage of grief. It helps us to survive the loss. It's the initial, hold up, wait a minute, what's happening? That our body, sometimes it's literally a physical shock that we go through. It's a mental pause that gives us a little bit of grace to breathe. I think it's good to think about denial in that way. Denial is the way to add grace to our brain, give our brains a grace period to really process what just happened, to give our bodies a minute to say, wait, I now have to live in a world without the person who meant the world to me. And so I really need us to not to demonize the idea of denial. People are in denial because they can't manage the thought of the truth. So denial is a way to add grace in there. And so it helps us to cope, and it makes survival possible. It helps us to pace our feelings of grief, become stronger. When you're becoming stronger, as soon as you become stronger, I should say, denial begins to fade. But what it fades into is anger. And so that's the next stage of grief, is anger. It's a necessary stage in the healing process. Be willing to feel your anger, and even though it may seem endless. True, it's very true that anger sometimes is boundless and it's endless, and I'm being mad at everything around me. I'm mad at the world. Why couldn't God keep this from happening? Why does the world operate this way? These questions that come up, those questions one by one sort of build a bridge between where we are right now and us still staying connected to that person who we lost. So we are on, essentially, we've come past where we're denying they're gone. We're not denying that. We're now in anger. We realize they're gone, and it hurts. And so the next thing is to be angry. Underneath that anger is pain. Your pain, it's natural. It's like you feel like you've been deserted or abandoned, that person who left you, though not of their own volition often. So that's something else we have to consider a little later on, maybe another episode. People who leave by their own volition, and the anger and the pain that comes along with that. But we're just talking about the grief and the anger that comes along when you cannot control the circumstance and you lose someone who is dear to you and you love. And so you must get angry at someone to place those feelings somewhere. Now that you realize what happened, you're angry because you want to know why. And you have all these questions. Next, we go to the third stage, which is bargaining. It seems like you'll do anything to get that person back. You'll say these huge platitudes. I'll never get angry again if you just allow this person to live. After a loss, it takes the form of a temporary truce to say, I'll devote myself the rest of the life to helping the poor, to doing this, to doing that. If only I could do this one thing. The song Dance with My Father, again, from Luther Vandross, has that. If I could take one more kiss, one more step, another dance with him, I'd play a song that never ends. I do whatever it takes to just get one more minute with that person. I think a lot of us often get stuck in this place. And while it's so important to be here, it's really also important not to allow the guilt to sink in. That if I had been there 2 minutes earlier, they would have lived. Had I been at the hospital to tell the doctor to disregard their do not resuscitate, they could have been live. Had I been able to talk them out of this, or had I been able to feed them better, they would have been on the better side of health. Or sometimes we fall into guilt and we believe what this person has gone through or their death is our fault. And it's really important not to let that fall into guilt. If it does fall into guilt, it's completely natural. But once again, give a break in there. Give yourself breath and realize that you did not do this. You could not have kept them from dying or living. It's not in your hands. The next stage is depression. After bargaining, our attention then moves squarely on the present. We have to sit in the thought and the truth that the person is gone and I must build a life without them. And that hurts. It hurts because it's essentially our dream that's dying. The plans that we had and the things that we wanted to do with that person, or the things that we had planned on doing, or them seeing our children grow up, or them seeing us grow up. We have to divorce ourselves from that idea. And giving that up is like giving up a part of ourselves. And sometimes we fall into a depressive state. This is not to say you have clinical depression. No. This is to say that you have now entered into a depression. They are different. Depression here in this as a stage of guilt, as a stage of grief, please forgive me, is completely natural, and you should see it. Desiring, you should not necessarily be desiring it, but you should see it when you're going through the grief cycle. That depression after a loss, it's because the loss seems so unnatural. You can't make sense of it. And so going to a little bit of a depressive state where you allow the grief to kind of go down into the deepest being of your soul, it makes your bones colder to realize and to feel the loss of that person. So the grief there that leads into depression is completely natural. But once we come to the other side of that grief and we're able to process through it, often with a professional, often with friends, we come to the other side, and that is acceptance. That doesn't mean it's all right. It doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean we're going to miss them. We're not going to miss them. That doesn't mean that it makes sense. It will never make sense. But it means that you've come to a place that you can breathe. That you're not dealing with the anger every moment of the day. That you're not dealing with the guilt that comes with the bargaining. That you're not dealing with the problems and the heartache that is so loud and so close to you. It comes to the point where you can say, I am okay. And then you begin to live again once you've gotten past those stages. So we've gotten to 5 stages of grief. Now, Dr. Kessler, David Kessler, who actually helped to author the 5 stages of grief with Dr. Kubler-Ross, he comes up with a 6th stage. And this is meaning making. It's a book called Finding Meaning by Dr. Kessler. And essentially, it's the path to wellness. The path to making this make sense. Though it will never make sense, someone dying at a young age will never make sense. You know, the tragedy that happens in the world doesn't make sense. The finding meaning is a way to integrate their story into your story. Integrate the love that they gave you, the love that you gave them into your story, and to make it a bigger picture. To make it a picture that has colors from every portion of your life, and not just this big black hole that we sometimes find ourselves inside of when we go through grief. So once we get past that stage, we get to the finding meaning stage. And often we'll see that eventually in America. We are not at that stage right now as it pertains to COVID-19. We're nowhere near that stage right now. Some people may have platitudes and some people may have prophecies and things that try and explain this thing. We are nowhere near the meaning-making stage. And right now, it'd be good for us to just feel the grief as it comes. We talked about the 5 stages of grief and then the bonus one from Dr. Kessler. I'm going to talk to you about an idea about ambiguous loss. We're going to tie it all together in the end. Ambiguous loss is this idea that it's an idea by Dr. Pauline Boss that she's a therapist also. She came up with this idea, coined the term in 1970. And so it's the idea that what you're going through or the loss that you're experiencing, it doesn't quite have a name. And so it's ambiguous. It doesn't quite say, for instance, those who are going through, their parents have dementia, where they're physically present, but they're mentally gone. Or people who had lost a family member in the Twin Towers and they were looking for bodies for weeks and weeks on end. And so it puts you in a place of paused grief because you can't get to acceptance. You can probably get to about bargaining, where you're saying, please, Lord, let them be alive. I'll be the best person in the world. I'll give to everything. And so you cycle through those first 3 stages because you don't have anything to grasp on. I'm going to leave that idea for a moment. We're going to go over to this idea of, as I talked earlier, this comes up, Dr. Tabitha Perez talks about this, about leprosy. So in our communities, all of us have experienced where there's 1 or 2 people who are on the outside of the community because they are the leprous person, the person who is ill, the person who is without, and they hold the weight of the trauma of the community. Right now, what makes it so amazing and painful at the same time is that we're all that leprous person. We all have leprosy. And so in the pain that that person who normally held the trauma of the collective, we all are feeling it. And we're all feeling our own pain. Someone who you normally would reach out for and touch and hug and kiss multiple times a week or on a weekly basis at very least, now they recoil at the sight of your entrance, or they recoil at you coming closer to them. And that's a rejection that if we don't deal with it, could cause some really deep rifts in our relationships. And so we must place it, this ambiguous loss, where it belongs. So the person is there mentally, they're no longer there physically. So you can talk to them on the phone. You can talk to them via FaceTime. You can talk to them but via text or social media, but you can't touch them. You can't feel them. And so as a collective, we're all going through this ambiguous loss where we don't know where to place it and we can't properly grieve. And we're kind of in this state of limbo. And this is really, it's a place where we all kind of got to get comfortable with being at right now, because we don't have any answers. We don't have any answers about when this is going to be over, what this means. We don't have any answers for anything or how many people will pass. But now we're in this kind of a limbo portion where ambiguous loss is what we're going through. And we're having to deal with these issues and these emotions. And so as a whole, we're all going through these stages of grief, but we're kind of paused. I'm going to come back a little bit later and tell you guys about the 5 tips about dealing with loss and how they're going to help us through this season of what we're going through. Right now, let's get some feedback from the ladies.
Tab, you said a lot of really good things throughout your talk today. I am particularly want to just elaborate on at least 3 things. One, grief is not limited just to death. We have experienced where we can have losses that don't include death, include things such as loss of health, diagnosis with mental health, changes in relationship. So these are changes and adjustments. And so we are all experiencing some aspect of grief right now, because the way we have lived our life up to this point is no longer. We are not able to go to the gas station and get coffee. And for me, I love like the good ice from Wawa. I can't just go and get that anymore. And so there's a sense of loss. There's certain things about my previous life that I am missing. You know, going to get these potato wedges from Titties, you know, just so the little things that brought me joy, I no longer have access to. You know, grief, as it's something that us as a society, we are not adequately prepared to deal with. As many things, as I said before, in our culture, you know, emotion, mental health, and especially grief. Too often we, you know, will say, be strong. Your loved one is in a better place, or, you know, you'll find another job or whatever have you. And these are very well-meaning things, but they are not necessarily helpful to hear, because when you want your mother with you, her being in a better place isn't so helpful to you. You know, I want her with me. And the last thing that I just wanted to share was in 1 Thessalonians 4:13, it says that we do not grieve as others, but we have hope. And I am so grateful that even in the midst of everything, and I don't want to spiritualize it and take away and invalidate how we feel. However, we do have hope. God has given us promises that He will make everything beautiful in His time, and that He will cause all things to work together for the good. I am not happy for the losses that I have endured in my life. However, I am grateful for the purpose that God has given in my pain. It gives me an entrance to work with some really challenging children, even adults, because I am well acquainted with pain. And I often tell my clients I may not feel pain by what caused you pain, but I'm well acquainted with it. It was a very sobering situation I had a few years ago when I was with my 5-year-old great niece at the time, and her mother had just passed away. And I thank God for the purpose and the pain, because I was able to identify with her and say, you know what, my mom is in the same place your mom is at, and able to help bridge that gap to begin to pave the road for her healing. So Val, what are you thinking about this topic?
Well, ladies, I think both of you have shared tremendous perspectives. When I hear the both of you speaking, a story comes to mind from the Bible. I think one that we can probably relate to now more than ever, and that is the story of Job, right? So when we looked at the story of Job in the Bible, we were able to see that he had everything. And then kind of like in the blink of an eye of one day, he lost everything. He lost all his cattle, his business, he lost his own children, his health declined, and he had sores all over his body. And through all this, Job remained faithful to the Lord. And because of that, God rewarded him with more than he could even imagine, more than what he had before. So I think it's a great testament of us to remain hopeful through this time in which we may be experiencing loss of a loved one, loss of job and income, maybe loss of a home. And I know all these processes are not easy, right? We grieve these losses. So in the midst of this, I just want to remind you that it's okay to feel the pain and move through it, process it without ignoring it or avoiding it, because it's not going to be helpful for us and it's only going to prolong our grief. But to understand that all this is fine, in the sense of it's okay that I'm feeling this way. You know, I'm experiencing this disappointment, which I was not expecting. And because of it, now I have to grieve these emotions. And to understand that unprocessed grief will lead to very unhealthy behaviors. So being able to process and heal is so monumental for grief in order for us to truly live well. That's all I got for you today.
Thank you so much, ladies. And thank you guys for sticking around for this, the weight of this important topic. Now we're going to talk about the 5 tips to remember when dealing with loss. I'm going to have the ladies to help me out with these a bit.
So tip number 1, it won't feel like this forever.
I think this is very important. In Ecclesiastes 3. In probably almost the entirety of the chapter, it talks about there's a time and a season for everything under the sun. And so there's a time to grieve, there's a time to mourn, there's a time to dance. While you are going through the mourning portion right now, have hope that your time of dancing is coming. It won't feel like this forever. There's a movie I like to, just the title of it is so amazing to me. It's called Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And grief feels just like that. It's like we're standing right next to the speaker, and grief is like boom, boom, boom. And it feels like that, like it's never going to end, but it won't last forever. You're only in the first stages. It's only lasting for a moment. It will pass.
Mm-hmm.
So Tab, what do you think about tip number 2? You can handle it even if you think you can't.
Absolutely. I say this all the time. You got this. You got this. And ladies, gentlemen, you got this. You are much stronger than you think. You can do it. You can get to the other side of it. You can tough through this. You can feel through this. You can hurt through this. You can cry through this. You can fall apart through this, but you can rebuild. You've got this.
So with that being said, here's tip number 3, being gentle with yourself.
I think it all hinges on that last point I was saying. Cry through it. Hope through it. Feel sad through it. Allow yourself to feel it. So grief is completely normal. Be gentle with yourself. Don't push yourself to get to the other side of it, because you stunt your growth. You stunt your emotional growth of what you can learn through it, but you also stunt your emotional growth, and you shut down those centers that would have been developed throughout this time. So be gentle with yourself. Allow yourself time. It's not going to happen in a week. It's not going to happen in a month. It's not going to happen sometimes even in a year. If it's a parent or someone who is very close to you, give it time. Be gentle with yourself. You can do it, but it's going to take time.
Tip number 4, you mentioned earlier, Tab, to think in cycles, not in lines.
I think this one's very important as it pertains to the grief cycle. Before, it used to be called the stages of grief. And they had to back up a little bit off of that wording because people think they graduate one stage, and they go to the next stage, and they go to the next stage, and they go to the next stage. And once I'm on step 5, I'm no longer looking at step 1 again, because step 1 is beneath me. And then you regress and you hurt yourself when you go back to step 1, and you're like, what happened?
Right.
And so think about it in cycles. I'm on the grief cycle. Life happens in cycles. There's a time to be born. There's a time to die. There's time to mourn. There's a time to dance. Things happen in cycles. We, as Nicole, as you were saying earlier, we are not without hope. Those who have gone on before us, we will see again. And so that gives us the solid hope in knowing that life is but a cycle. I think it's really important for us to grab a hold of that right now.
And tip number 5, your feelings are normal.
Absolutely. As I was talking about earlier about depression, there's a difference between clinical depression and the depression that rides alongside in the sidecar with grief. It's absolutely normal. Of course, you're going through this. You're going to want to talk to a grief counselor. You're going to want to talk to your friends. You're going to want to talk to your pastor, whomever you have in your circle. You're going to want to talk to them. But it's completely normal to cycle through these emotions, because while you may have experienced the loss of someone you loved before, you've also never been through this here. You've never done this before. You've never lost this person before. You've never dealt with this pain before. And so it's normal. I always just say, add breath into it. Remember to breathe, because none of this, you've never done any of this before. And so give yourself a little space. Your feelings are completely normal. Thank you, ladies, for the 5 tips. They knew about those 5, but I've got a couple more that I really, really want to let you guys know about. So it's 5, and then we got a bonus 2 here. The next tip, which is tip number 6, grief can beget meaning. And this comes off of Dr. David Kessler's book. And that's, if you guys want any of these resources, you can email us. I'll tell you about it later, and we'll send you all the resources that we have. Grief can beget meaning, finding meaning. Eventually, when you come to the other side of this grief, when it doesn't hurt as loud and as close and doesn't feel like you're right next to the speaker of grief, you can beget meaning, and you can begin to draw out these colors and paint a better picture and a bigger and a more beautiful picture for your life. And God can take the ashes and make something beautiful in your life. Grief can truly beget meaning. And then the last point, you are not alone. You are not alone. First of all, God came down to earth in the form of Jesus just to show you that you are not alone, that you are not alone. His name is Emmanuel, God with us. You are not alone. So not only that, but your community, those who are in community with you, you cannot see them right now. You can't touch them right now. You can't be with them right now, some of them, but you can call them. You can FaceTime with them. You can connect with them in some way. Remind yourself day in and day out, though I may be alone right now, I'm not lonely. Though I may be alone physically right now, I'm not alone spiritually. And those who have gone on before me, I will see them again. And so this is really just about learning to be content with where you are. Learning to be content and being at a place of peace when nothing makes sense. When you've got this ambiguous loss and you can't graduate to that next level, and you can't get to that next level of the stages of grief because you have this ambiguous loss and you don't know when it's gonna be over. You don't know who else we're gonna lose. You don't know who else is gonna die. You haven't heard from this person in 3 days. You don't know if they're well. You know somebody with COVID-19. You don't know if they're gonna live. We're in this liminal space between life and death. All of us are. It's really important to breathe through it and understand that you are not alone. If you guys have any questions, please comment in the comment section below. Be sure to like. But these are just the questions you don't mind answering out in the open. We'll answer them on the 4th week cycle of these, and we'll put all the Q&A together and we'll answer them together. But if you have personal questions or personal prayer requests, EYT at cicorlando.org. E for empowering, Y for your, T for thoughts. Email us at EYT at cicorlando.org so that we can connect with you. And of course, there's a link in the description below. Click that link and put all your information in there, and we'll send you the resources that we have and that I pulled from for today's show. Thank you, guys.
So that was great, ladies. I don't know about y'all, but I am not okay. This has been a very trying and challenging time for us all. So next week's show, we're going to talk about how to be okay when you're not okay. So stay tuned. Make sure you come back next week.
I am so interested in that topic because none of us are okay right now. It's just not a place to be okay. Yeah. So thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Empowering Your Thoughts, an outreach ministry of Christ International Church. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, email us at EYT@cicorlando.org. And thank you all. Be safe. Be sure to wash your hands, practice social distancing, wear a face mask, do all the stuff so we can see you again here next week. Be empowered to think well. Love you guys.